This is an LA Times Studios podcast.
Chris Goffard here at LA Times Studios. Thanks for joining us on Crimes of the Times. In today's episode, the case of Barbara Graham, known in the 1950s as Bloody Babs, after the murder of a Burbank widow. We talked to Marcia Clark about the questionable tactics that sent Graham to death row. Tell us what you think in the comments below. Barbara Graham was 32 years old when she was escorted into the gas chamber at San Quentin State Prison in June 1955. She was the third woman to be executed in California and one of the last. By then, 2 years after the crime that sent her to prison, the Los Angeles newspapers were calling her Bloody Babs. The coverage dwelled endlessly on her appearance and her supposed coldness. Some articles called her the redhead, others the icy blonde, or sultry Barbara Graham, or shapely Barbara Graham, the blonde iceberg. A Los Angeles Daily Mirror gossip columnist covering her trial had called her that monster disguised as a woman, adding, Barbara Graham, 29-year-old blonde gun moll, must be a pleasant little trick to meet in a dark alley. She had a voice that was as metallic as her character, according to the Herald Express, which called her potentially the most beautiful victim that the gas chamber will ever have claimed. In these descriptions and in many others, you could sense a kind of giddiness as journalists vied to portray her as a seductive murderess out of a James M. Cain or Raymond Chandler novel. What was her crime? In the company of four men, she had participated in the home invasion robbery of an elderly disabled widow, Mabel Monahan, who kept cash and jewelry at her Burbank home and was found there bludgeoned and strangled. In a career full of notable cases, it was one of Los Angeles prosecutor J. Miller Levy's big wins. In his 80s, near the end of his life, Levy was firm in the belief that Barbara Graham and the 12 other people he'd sent to death row had deserved it. Their deaths were a lot more merciful than the deaths they caused, he said. He added, Barbara Graham tied Mabel Monahan's hands behind her back, pistol-whipped her, and left her to die. Sending her to the gas chamber didn't bother me at all. Levy would become an inspiration for generations of prosecutors at the LA County DA's office.
He was an icon. It was a little bit of a joke among my peers in the DA's office when I was there. You know, anytime somebody lost a case, they'd say, oh, J. Miller Levy could have won it.
Marcia Clark became acquainted with the Levy legend during her 14 years at the DA's office, where, during the ill-fated O.J. Simpson case, she became one of the most famous prosecutors of her generation. When she started reading transcripts of the Barbara Graham trial for a book project, she was excited to see how the storied Levy operated. But after some research, her opinion about him nosedived. The more she looked into it, the more the official account became harder to believe.
Barbara's life was fascinating to me, but the trial and the manner in which it was conducted, what the judge did, what the prosecutors did, what the defense did, that was, to me, the big focus. So Barbara was somebody who really was thrown away, neglected, and abandoned from birth.
This is Marcia Clark talking about Barbara Graham, whose LA murder trial was national news and the source of much sensationalized coverage during the Eisenhower era. Clark's book about it is called Trial by Ambush. As a girl, Barbara was repeatedly thrown out of the house and sent to live with relatives. Eventually, she was sent to a reform school, the Ventura School for Girls.
The girls that she was being housed with really were, many of them, very experienced criminals. She was not. She was a truant. She got a real education about what a criminal meant when she went to that school. Barbara would run away from the reform school, run home and beg to stay home. The mother would call the cops and have her dragged off in handcuffs over and over again. And then she wound up really running away for good by the time she was 16. She barely went through 8th grade. Nevertheless, was very intelligent, innately intelligent, loved jazz, liked to read. But nevertheless, because she had no skills, it was hard for her to make a living. So she wound up doing the things that people on the fringes with no skills do: shoplifting, check kiting, that sort of thing. And then she eventually became, because she was very pretty, what was called a dice girl, which is basically a shill for these informal, illegal gambling houses where she would encourage men to spend their money and gamble and drink.
Barbara Graham met up with a man named Emmett Perkins, who ran a dice and poker house in El Monte and reminded people of a weasel.
The weasel face, as they described him in the press. And he was. I mean, that was pretty accurate.
She also met a bartender named Hank, who became her fourth husband and who turned out to be a heroin junkie and a deadbeat. She got hooked herself and busted for drug possession. They were broke, and she was raising their baby Tommy, who was her third child. Sometimes she and the baby found refuge overnight at the gambling house to escape her husband.
So she was check kiting and shoplifting to try and put food on the table for all of them. And then this opportunity, quote unquote, presented itself.
One day, a rough-looking man named Jack Santo showed up at the gambling house. He was a veteran hooligan and sometime criminal partner of the weasel-faced Perkins.
They were crime partners who were murderers together, and they had cut a wide swath through the Bay Area and north of that in the gold country. It killed a minor, killed a man and 3 children, stuffed them in the trunk. These guys were very bad news. I think much more bad news than Barbara knew. Barbara knew them to be gamblers who worked in the gambling house, and she was a shill for them.
A rumor was circulating that a retired vaudeville performer named Mabel Monahan had a pile of cash in a safe in her Burbank home. Her former son-in-law ran gambling operations in Las Vegas and was said to be stashing profits there to keep it from the IRS. Hundreds of thousands of dollars, according to rumor.
And people and the bad guys floating around Los Angeles were thinking about trying to break in and get that money. And a couple of them were safecrackers, or as they called them back in the day, boxmen. And so that was the rumor floating around. And then it floated its way into Emmett Perkins' ears and Jack Santos's ears. And they decided, we're going to make this hit. They decided, though, that they needed Barbara.
Why did they need Barbara? Because Mabel Monahan was safety conscious and would not open her door to just anybody, especially not to hard-looking thugs like Perkins and Santo. But the physically unthreatening Barbara Graham might get them inside.
She was petite, and she knew how to be very charming, and that's how Barbara became their recruited decoy.
In the robbery crew that night were Santo Perkins, a safecracker named Baxter Shorter, and John True, a wiry deep-sea diver whose self-serving account of what happened inside the authorities would adopt as fact.
On the night of the actual incident, Barbara goes to the door and tells Mabel Monahan, my car broke down. If I could please use your phone, just be a minute. I don't know anybody in the neighborhood. Mabel thinks that, I think for a moment, but decides, what's the harm, lets her in. As soon as Barbara's in the door, John True follows right behind her. And subsequently, a couple minutes later, Jack Santo goes in, then Emmett Perkins, then their safecracker guy, Baxter Shorter, goes in.
The robbers sacked the house in search of the safe, but never found one. They missed a purse in the closet that actually did contain $500 and expensive jewelry. 2 days later, a gardener spotted blood in the house, and Mabel Monahan's body was found. She had been bludgeoned and choked.
She had been dragged down the hallway and left garroted with something around her neck and a pillowcase over her head, blood on the walls, blood on the floor. So the police wind up with absolutely no eyewitnesses, no physical evidence, no fingerprints. There was nothing to go on until they started tapping everybody in the neighborhood. It took weeks for them to get someone to finally crack. His name was Baxter Shorter.
Have you ever woken up with a funky symptom and immediately Googled it to see what's wrong? We've all gone down that rabbit hole, but it's time to get the help and care you really need with ZocDoc. ZocDoc is a free app and website where you can search and compare high-quality, in-network doctors and click to instantly book an appointment. We're talking about booking in-network appointments with more than 100,000 doctors across every specialty. Once you find the right doctor, you can see their actual appointment openings, choose a time slot that works for you, and click to instantly book a visit. I just used ZocDoc the other week and I got an appointment the same day. Stop putting off those doctor's appointments and go to ZocDoc.com/crimesofthetimes and find and instantly book a top-rated doctor today. That's ZocDoc.com/crimesofthetimes. ZocDoc.com/crimesofthetimes.
I value sleep more in my 30s than I ever did in my 20s. A bad night's sleep can affect both my mood as well as my physical health. If I toss and turn all night, I really feel it in my neck and shoulders. I'm cranky. It's bad. That's why I'm so excited to share something that's made a real difference in my life, Beam's Dream Powder. Beam Healthy Nighttime Blend is packed with science-backed ingredients shown to improve sleep, so you can wake up refreshed and ready to take on the day, whether that's going to work or solving a cold case. Dream is made with a powerful blend of all-natural ingredients: reishi, magnesium, L-theanine, epigenin, and melatonin. It's designed to help you fall asleep, stay asleep, and wake up feeling amazing. Beam has already improved over 17.5 million nights of sleep, helping people across the country wake up and feel their best. Here's the deal. Beam is giving my listeners their best offer yet of up to 40% off. Try their best-selling Dream Powder and get up to 40% off for a limited time. Go to shopbeam.com/crimes and use code CRIMES at checkout. That's shopbeam.com/crimes and use code CRIMES for up to 40% off. Solve the case of your bad sleep by trying Beam today.
Mabel Monahan's murder at her Burbank home in March 1953 generated heavy media interest. Wealthy widow beaten to death in California, read one headline. The Burbank Police Department had no eyewitnesses and no fingerprints at the scene. They canvassed the area and interrogated their informants. One informant told them he'd cased the Monahan house for a possible burglary 2 years earlier. He hadn't gone through with it, but he gave them the name of one of his partners in the aborted scheme, Baxter Shorter. Shorter was a so-called boxman or safecracker. Maybe he'd know what had happened to Mabel Monahan. And so, 2 weeks after her murder, detectives confronted Shorter, who admitted he had been there the night of her death but wanted immunity if he talked. He said he knew his accomplices only by their first names, but that there were 3 men and a woman. They'd gathered in a car outside the Smokehouse restaurant near the Warner Brothers lot before attempting the heist. Shorter was supposed to be the safecracker, but there was no safe.
He came on late to the scene when they summoned him in just to prove to him that there was nothing to get. And he saw Mabel trussed up, lying on the floor, bleeding. He wound up calling the ambulance as he left, after he left the house, and gave the address, except he gave the wrong address. So the ambulance never came.
Based on Shorter's leads, police identified the accomplices as Emmett Perkins, Jack Santo, John True, and Barbara Graham. As soon as word leaked out that Shorter was talking to police, however, his wife reported that Perkins appeared at their home, kidnapped her husband at gunpoint, and forced him into a car. Shorter, the safecracker, was never seen again. With him gone, it was John True who became the government's star witness.
So John True's story is that he enters to find Barbara holding Mabel Monahan by the neck with one hand and pistol whipping her with the other hand. And that he was so upset by this that he put his hand between the gun and Mabel's face and told Barbara, "Stop this, stop this." But that's all he did. He didn't pull Barbara away. He didn't pull the gun out of her hand. He's bigger and stronger than Barbara by far, did none of the above. And he claims that he's the one who cut the pillowcase off her head. He's the one who tried to loosen the garrote from around her neck. He claims all these things, making himself the one who tried to rescue Mabel Monahan. That's his story as told in the courtroom.
The prosecutors cut a very sweet deal for him, didn't they?
Oh, the prosecutors gave the courthouse away for him. I can't blame them because they had no case without him. They had no proof, no way to prove anything. And once Baxter Shorter disappeared, they had to turn one of them. The one who had the least rap sheet was John True.
Barbara Graham was arrested and charged with murder. It didn't help her case that she claimed not to remember where she was on the night in question. As the case headed to trial, she emerged as the focus of the public's interest, and newspapers took slap-happy relish in casting her as a character out of pulp fiction. What was it about Barbara Graham that fascinated the media back then? I mean, I've got some quotes from the various papers. The Los Angeles Mirror calls her Bloody Babs. One reporter says she looks like a showgirl because she's wearing high heels and bright red lipstick. You connect it to your own experience. You write, very early on in the Simpson trial, I learned the hard way that I had to be on my guard every minute of the day. And they called you Giggles Clark at one point because they caught you smiling about something during DNA testimony, right?
Right. I think the media went after Barbara because she was a woman, especially back in the 50s. A woman being involved in a heinous, very violent murder like this was very unusual. This was something that really never happened. And then on top of that, she was beautiful. They criticized her for wearing high heels and a tight suit. That's what women wore back then. And I saw the pictures of her, and she has her hair pulled back in a bun, and yes, she's wearing makeup. But by no means is she looking like, Elvira or something. It's not like she looked outlandish. She looked beautiful. And they just weren't prepared for a woman who looked like that to be involved in a case like this. Talk about Beauty and the Beast. She has these two thugs on either side that couldn't look more like what exactly they were. The weasel-faced Emmett Perkins and the brutish-looking Jack Santos. And there she sits, the flower in the middle of these two. The contrast was astonishing. So, it was one of these things where I think this was the draw. Of course, it's also what provoked the prosecution to go so hard after her in such an unseemly way. And it would be fair to say that the law allowed them to do what they did. And a lot of things that would be absolutely grounds for disbarment today were permitted at that time. So I don't fault them in that respect. What I fault them for, though, is the way in which they went after Barbara on a personal level, because she was the get. She was the one that was hard to convict. So they felt they had to pull out all the stops, and they did.
She told me that her perceptions of the legendary prosecutor J. Miller Levy shifted as she researched her book.
He was a very good lawyer, don't get me wrong, but what I didn't expect to see was that he was a sleazy player.
At one point, Levy told jurors that Barbara Graham had taken the stand to testify with the hope of bewitching and seducing them. She wanted to flaunt herself, he said. She believes she can turn your heads from the performance of your duty.
While it was permissible, legally permissible, I think it was really a low blow. Men, beware. We want you to be aware of the fact that she did this. She got up on that witness stand for only one reason, and that is to turn your head and to make sure that you thought about only how pretty she is and not the fact that she's guilty as sin. And it absolutely did fall on fertile ground. As I note later in the book, one of the jurors came out, a man, and said, yeah, I wasn't about to buy her act. J. Miller Levy spoke to that very fear that they were being manipulated. And so it was ugly, a low blow, but it was legal. Now, would it happen today? I think it would not be allowed today. We're a lot more sensitive to doing what's fair and doing what's right in terms of how we allow prosecutors to talk about defendants.
What Levy used to clinch Barbara Graham's conviction was a law enforcement tactic that certainly would be illegal today. For the prosecutor, the scheme worked more spectacularly than he could have hoped.
There are so many things in life that we never get around to. Taking up that hobby, cleaning out the garage, little things that don't really make a huge difference in our lives. Yet there's one thing that most of us have probably been neglecting that can have a huge impact on our family's future. It's life insurance, and with SelectQuote, getting covered with the right policy for you is easier and more affordable than you may think. SelectQuote is one of America's leading insurance brokers with nearly 40 years of experience. Other life insurance brokers offer impersonal, one-size-fits-all policies that may cost you more and cover you less, while SelectQuote's licensed insurance agents work for you to tailor a life insurance policy for your individual needs in as little as 15 minutes. Head to SelectQuote.com and a licensed insurance agent will call you right away with the right policy for your life and your budget. Get the right life insurance for you for less at SelectQuote.com/crimesofthetimes. Go to SelectQuote.com/crimesofthetimes today to get started. That's SelectQuote.com/crimesofthetimes.
It's sort of very similar as to being a foster parent. You go in it not for the length of time, but to know that even 2 months or 10 years can still create a big impact in a child's life. So CASA is a nonprofit organization that stands for Court-Appointed Special Advocate.
Okay.
And they specialize in making sure that the child's needs are met, whether it's medical, health, educational, and ensuring that the child is receiving the most stability they can.
Barbara Graham's story inspired the 1958 film I Want to Live, starring Susan Hayward, who won an Oscar for her sympathetic but campy portrayal of the accused murderess. In the film, based in part on Barbara Graham's letters, she's framed, basically punished for being too brassy and free-spirited and sexually adventurous. She sneers at the cops. She always has a clever quip for her tormentors. She smokes cigarettes with men in darkened rooms. She's heartbroken by a heroin-addled husband who hits her and uses her. The film's ad copy gives you a sense of how the Barbara Graham story was received at the time. She was the wildest of the jazzed-up generation. She had lots of friends, most of them bad. She was driven by 1,000 desires, a few of them decent. She sinned, she stole, but she swore she never murdered. During her time in LA County Jail awaiting her murder trial, Barbara Graham met another inmate named Donna Prow. Prow was in her early 20s and serving time for a drunk driving-related manslaughter charge. Prow befriended Barbara Graham and turned on the charm.
Donna went after Barbara and plied her with money, with candy, with presents, with everything, and ultimately Barbara and Donna became lovers.
In one letter that became public, Graham addressed Prow as honey and wrote, "I want you to be sure of your feelings or I wouldn't want to start something we couldn't finish. You are a very lovely and desirable woman, honey, and I want you very much." She made her fall in love with her, basically.
Yes.
I've read those notes. They're full of what seems like real affection. Real
affection, absolutely. And very, very romantic and very heartfelt. There's an awful lot of interaction between them. And, for all that they really couldn't physically be together all that much, it seems like there was quite an affair going on.
Graham's attorney had told her that she would likely face the gas chamber if she didn't supply an alibi, and Graham was increasingly desperate. Donna Prow told her she had a solution. She said she had a friend who would give Graham an alibi. He would arrive at the jail as a visitor, and they would cobble together the fake story that would save her. How would Graham know who he was? Graham suggested that he use a certain password when he showed up, and she suggested a line from the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, "I came like water, and like wind I go." A man named Sam Sirianni showed up who knew the password. He promised to say she had been with him at an Encino motel on the night of the murder. At trial, however, prosecutor J. Miller Levy unleashed his big surprise. Sam Sirianni was an undercover cop. He had worn a wire. He had Barbara Graham on tape concocting the fake alibi. He even had her admitting that she'd been with her co-defendants on the night in question. Her credibility was destroyed.
Imagine how she felt. This is the guy that she thought was going to give her the alibi. She hadn't wanted to do it. She was reluctant to the very end, as her letters reveal. And then in he walks, turns out to be an undercover cop, and she realizes that Donna has sold her down the river. And so it's a double betrayal. This woman that she thought was in love with her, that she was in love with, they were planning a life together. And look what happened. I can only imagine how she was feeling in that moment, seeing him walk up there and take the oath and say he's Officer Sam Sirianni.
Police had orchestrated Donna Prow's charm offensive against Graham, a tactic that would be illegal today under something called the Messiah ruling, since Graham was represented by a lawyer and Prow was essentially acting as a police agent. Graham insisted the whole fake alibi scheme had been Prow's idea. You believe that Donna planted that idea in Barbara's head?
I do believe that, and I believe it because there was plenty of evidence to back it up.
Graham's defense attorneys never got a chance to cross-examine Prow and establish that she'd planted the idea because Prow could not be located.
No one could find her, and the prosecution made sure of it. And that was illegal. They hid a key witness. They would have pried out of her how much effort she went to get Barbara to go along with the false alibi scheme. And that would have made, I think, things look a lot different to the jury.
When prosecutor J. Miller Levy cross-examined Barbara Graham, much of the questioning involved her love letters to Donna Prow. Why did J. Miller Levy find it so necessary to go through all of those notes in such excruciating detail? What purpose did that serve?
Well, that is the question. That was my question, Chris. He went through the notes that Barbara wrote to Donna, laying particular emphasis on love you, honey, and all the, XOXO and all that stuff. And he went over and over and over it. At one point, she said, "Must you read it again? I have said, yes, I wrote those notes." And it was very clear why he did it. He's tarnishing her character in front of the jury. Back then, there was not much grace given to homosexual relationships of any kind. And so this was a way of turning the jury against her.
You were a prosecutor for a long time. How would you have approached this case? What would you have done and what would you not have done?
Well, I certainly wouldn't have done that. You have the letters from Donna Prow. That's not necessary. I don't think any of that romantic stuff was required. I've already got her basically, cuffed to her own effort to secure a false alibi with the testimony of Sam Sirianni. We have no reason to doubt him. You've got it all right there. So I think that for me, that would have been plenty. And I would not have driven her to that point where she basically said to Miller Levy, "Do you know what it's like to be that desperate? I don't think you do. And I think if you did, you would do the same as I did." I mean, she had a lot of gumption. She really, might not have served her with that 1950s jury to be as tough as she was, because she went toe-to-toe with him and she did not back down. But I found myself kind of admiring her moxie. Her moxie, that's an old word.
I mean, as a prosecutor, you have many approaches to this case, right? Is it possible you would have maybe focused more on using her as a witness, flipping her, and making the case against the weasel and the brute and the box man instead?
I might have wanted to be honest with you. I think there are two reasons they could not. Number one reason is she had a conviction for perjury. The other reason is I don't think Barbara would have been inclined. Bear in mind, the only family, the only warmth she ever knew were all these criminals that took her in when no one else would. She had no family to speak of. Her mother threw her out every chance she got. So the friends that she made, that's all she had. And she was very loyal. So she probably would not have agreed to testify against them, no matter what.
There was little hope of Barbara Graham avoiding a murder conviction because if she played any role in the robbery that resulted in Monahan's death, she was guilty under the felony murder rule. She denied she was ever there. Marcia Clark thinks she was present, but present as a decoy, the person who got the victim to open the door. She believes it makes no sense to credit John True's uncorroborated account that Barbara Graham had bludgeoned her. So, say you're the defense attorney in this. What hope do you have realistically given the felony murder rule? If you put her at the scene, she doesn't really have an alibi. She's gonna get convicted of murder one way or another, right? So knowing all that you know, is there anything to do on the defense side except maybe spare her the death penalty?
That's it. That's it, Chris. That's all you can do. Once you have her there at the scene committing the burglary with the other guys, even if John True had not testified that she took part in the murder with pistol whipping the victim, she would still be convicted of murder and burglary. And she would still, back then, be facing the death penalty. And so the only thing you can do is try and spare her that ultimate sentence.
Jurors convicted Barbara Graham and her co-defendants of murder. And in October 1953, 6 months after the crime, a judge sentenced them to death. As she awaited the death warrant, she spoke to journalists at length, and some of the coverage became markedly more sympathetic. Did she really deserve to die? Thousands sent letters pleading with the governor to commute her sentence. But in June 1955, her execution date was set. The night before, a nurse was brought in to keep her company.
And they talked and reminisced and talked about their children. Barbara talked about her son, Tommy. The morning came, and she got dressed, folded everything neatly, left it in the cell, hanging neatly. It was, hard to read.
Even on her final day, her appearance was a preoccupation among journalists. The LA Times wrote, "The brashly attractive 32-year-old convicted murderess walked to her death as if dressed for a shopping trip."
This woman is about to be executed, and you're talking about her like she's at a fashion show, describing her earrings, her suit, her this. I mean, it was unbelievable to me.
One of Barbara Graham's requests was to be allowed to wear a mask. "I don't want to see the people," she said.
They usually didn't allow that, but the warden, who was a really good guy, found a sleeping mask for her. And she was ready to go, and they escorted her, one priest on either side, and got all the way up to the door. And they had previously kept the door to the gas chamber covered so she wouldn't have to see it. Now they had to uncover it. And they got up to the door when they snatched her back and said there's a last-minute call, because her lawyers were still fighting for her, still trying to get clemency or trying to get the penalty overturned. She had been stoic up until that point, and that's when she began crying and saying, "I was ready to go. Why couldn't you let me go?" And then finally, an hour later, they did. And she, held up by a priest on either side, walked into the gas chamber.
One of the witnesses to her execution was Sam Sirianni, the undercover cop. Another was prosecutor J. Miller Levy, on his way to becoming a legend, his conscience clear. Barbara Graham wore house slippers and a blindfold as a prison guard strapped her into the chair and whispered, "Take a deep breath and it won't be so bad." Her final recorded words were, "How the hell would you know?" Former LA Times columnist Al Martinez witnessed her death as a young reporter. Martinez wrote, "She gasped and strangled and strained against the straps that bound her. Saliva sprayed the air like a fine mist. Foam bubbled at her mouth." A cop next to him said, "Mabel Monahan died hard too." Soon after, her cohorts Jack Santo and Emmett Perkins were led in and sat side by side. Years later, the columnist remembered catching the eyes of one of the men for the briefest moment before the cyanide gas enveloped them. The LA Times headline read, "Babs, Santo, Perkins, gassed after delays." Marcia Clark told me that the Graham case, apart from galvanizing efforts against the death penalty, ultimately contributed to the Supreme Court's Messiah ruling in 1964, a landmark Sixth Amendment case which would have forbidden police from using Donna Prow and Sam Sirianni against Graham in the way they did.
Once someone is indicted and represented by counsel, you cannot question them via anything, undercover officer or not. So her case is one of many that made the Supreme Court ultimately decide this is not consistent with our system of justice.
From LA Times Studios, this is Crimes of the Times. To read more about these cases, check out Crimes of the Times at latimes.com. We also have a link to our video episodes in the show notes. This episode was written and reported by me, your host, Christopher Goffard. Our senior producers are Mary Knopf and Jonathan Shiflett, with sound design by Jonathan Shiflett. Executive editor is Deborah Anderlew. Associate producer is Jordan Patterson. Video editing by Cooper Kenward. Production services provided by JTB Studios. Our camera technicians and operators are Jeff Amlott, Julia McCabe, and Jason Newbert, with additional production support from Andrew Gombert, Patrick Stewart, and Anne-Marie Hauser. Denise Callahan is our studio manager. Ben Church is our production manager. Special thanks to LA Times Studios President Anna Magzanian, President and Chief Operating Officer of the Los Angeles Times, Chris Argenteri, and Executive Editor of the Los Angeles Times, Terry Tang. Crimes of the Times is executive produced and co-created by Darius Derrickson and me, Christopher Goffard.